Well, welcome. It's very exciting to have you here today, Vik. You've got an impeccable background, so I'm excited to dive in and learn a lot more about yourself and share that with our community. But to kind of start it off, the best way would be to share a little bit about your background, kind of where you've come from, where you're going, where you've landed, and then we'll dive right into it from there.
Yeah, right on. So first off, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. And I know we met sharing that panel way back when during the height of the pandemic. So it's good to reconnect. But Vik Sasi, I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is now, I think, currently under like 2 meters of snow. I certainly can't, very grateful for that, but glad to be in sunny California. But I grew up, the first generation immigrant family. Of my heritage is Indian. So my mom, dad, brother, and sister were all MDs, medical doctors. And so luckily I had black sheep. I was known as a black sheep from a very young age. And I knew I was, going to be a little more, but take more of a wayward journey, maybe more of a wayward person. So I did my undergrad down in biology. And, soon after I graduated from college, I really wanted to have impact in my career. I wanted to be out of my comfort zone. I didn't want to be a doctor, much to my parents' dismay. And so that basically set me on a path working abroad. So I spent about 1.5 years in East and Central Africa working for nonprofits and NGOs. And I spent 3.5 years in Haiti working as an analyst for President Clinton's foundation, and then later actually being poached by the government of Haiti to finish our project, which was working on the national HIV program after the earthquake. So it was, radically different than what most VCs, sort of come into after like a 2-year consulting or banking program or something like that. Non-traditional is basically my middle name. And after I finished in Haiti, I knew grad school was the next logical step in my career, and business school enables you to totally reinvent yourself, and was fortunate to go to University of Chicago and their full-time program. Was exposed to a number of different sort of hard finance internships and experiences, and ultimately joined a fintech and insurtech corporate venture fund straight out of school it was backed by a Fortune 300 legacy insurance carrier. So I did a lot of, I became a licensed insurance agent just to sort of speak the language, which was, an interesting endeavor just by itself. But specialized in blockchain, crypto, ag tech, and then some of the core fintech and insurtech parts. And then more recently, I spent about 2 years at that fund, and then I'm now coming up on 2.5 years at Dreamers, which is an early stage generalist fund based here in LA. Most notable aspects that were co-founded by Will Smith and Keisuke Honda, a major Japanese soccer player. What's interesting is that we're not a traditional celebrity fund or an offshoot of the family office. We're structured like a 2 and 20 venture fund and capitalized with all Japanese limited partners. So Nomura, the big investment bank, is our anchor. And then we have a pretty diverse composition of the rest of our capital base. Shiseido, Mitsubishi, ASICS, Dentsu, all make up our LP base. So that's where I am today and how I got here, and happy to delve into, more about our fund or whatever else I can answer for you or your listeners.
For sure. Well, all very exciting. I love the fact that you decided to diversify from the family background. I'm sure everybody's pretty happy with the move. You can always go back and be a doctor at 50 or something, so there's still room. So in this process, I think what I hear and what I love about your background is that you're very diverse and that you got to work in these other countries. So maybe talk a little bit about that experience and how that's actually folded into what you're doing in this diversity fund, because I think that really probably speaks well to why, and we can dive in a bit as well to why Will Smith and family kind of partnered and jumped in with you.
Yeah. So, I would say, one of the biggest things I learned from my experiences really abroad is you were so much closer to the end user. And whether that means like literally the detritus that comes from Western developed countries and like these like old t-shirts, Super Bowl champions that never were and things like that. But also just in terms of like, all the hand-me-down, like those Nokia phones that we, were our first phones are now making their way, around and sort of just being really, experiencing, going through life and serving that end user actually helped me sort of pitch and it's like, look, like I can actually empathize a lot more with, future consumers, especially ones in, whether it's emerging markets, frontier markets, to even just being, from Wisconsin and working at a fund that had Midwestern roots. We certainly did a lot of investing on both coasts, and clearly the Valley in New York and Boston are power centers. for venture. But at the end of the day, what I tend to found, or what I really like to select for with startups was, which ones can actually cater to that middle market, to to fly over country, to the 80% of Americans that live whose incomes in aggregate are far greater than those small pockets on the coast where the disposable incomes are higher and they have a lot more spend. And so that's always been something that's driven me, whether to starting my first job in the Democratic Republic of Congo, to even now looking for things that everyday consumers can actually enjoy. And really, it's about one thing that I think Uber really demonstrated was this idea of consumer surplus, where the consumer is deriving or getting so much more value so much more than what they're willing to pay, which I think, we all find, as much as we can, may complain about surge pricing and all these things, like it's still far better than waiting in a street looking for a cab or, trying to hail one down or something. So consumer surplus matters a ton to me. I've seen it in developing countries. And I basically apply that same sort of, framework as to how would this impact the end user, even in my day-to-day investing right now.
So when you're working there and you're working in the Congo or working in Haiti, did you get into the ground side of things where you're really focused on that end consumer, or did you get to see a lot of it just because there's containers coming in every day trying to help a community build and rebuild, and you start looking at this and saying, there's got to be other solutions here. There's got to be startups that can jump in and fill the voids here and fix this. And how can we get the startups starting in this country? And then, hey, wait, maybe we can invest from our country into these areas, and maybe that's a better way of helping them grow.
Right. Yeah. So, when I was abroad, I should note that this was very much sort of like my career now in tech. So everything we were doing, and especially honestly, the poorer the country, the more low tech your idea or the project or anything likely should be, given that they have rolling blackouts. Power is, can't be taken for granted. I worked for the Ministry of Health. And so, one thing that I can remember so fondly is how the world is dealing with this vaccine rollout, because I remember having to maintain a cold chain, nothing to the extent of, don't get me wrong, I mean, I'm not even putting myself near the shoes of the frontline workers and all the others that are getting this out. But I just remember it's like, okay, we got to have specific igloo coolers. We can't have, and then, when we go to a site, it's like, of course, they have no power and their generator is broken and there's a fight over who should pay for the gas, which means the fridges can't hold anything. And so, a lot of time, and so at the time, we'd see a lot of sort of tourists come looking for tech solutions. Like, how can we bring a CRM so that you can track all these things? And it was like, look, we're using computers, that still run on DOS. We can't we don't have reliable internet. So it doesn't even matter if the CRM is, God's gift to tracking patients. We don't have connectivity. So at the time I was actually not bearish, but I just wasn't as excited about introducing a lot of sort of things we take for granted in the everyday world today. And now, having been in venture, there's nothing I would love more than to sort of marry the two. But it's really hard. And I talk to a lot of my friends that are still working in development, and it's slower than I think we all would like. But it's like that for a reason, because so much more dollars have been wasted and burned trying to bring some of the more high tech solutions to some of these emerging countries. And everyone looks at the mobile phone as how Africa leapfrogged the landline and went straight to mobile. And it was like, yes, that's true. And we'd love to see that in a number of other things. Unfortunately, I'm not sure anything's come that close, though. Who knows where we'll be with granted, I guess, the Loon project it doesn't exist, but if Starlink or something comes to fruition, really, empowering connectivity all over, I think that can really be a leapfrog. There's also some really interesting crypto technologies, but anyway, I'll stop rambling, but I still remain as hopeful as ever, just a little more clear-eyed and less jaded.
Well, I think what you're putting this into context is that a lot of these startups that are branching in North America and they're going into these third world countries that really need the tech, but there's a lot of misunderstanding or misinterpretation of how the society's operating and functioning. So they're going in there with this fintech payment that's going to run this way. And then when they get there, they realize, man, they can't even support this. I can only do text or running off DOS. And I think there is a lot of lost dollars and lost mindset to the fact that what being on the ground really makes a big difference in your startup and how it can actually start to get into these rural regions or areas that can't support things. Even you mentioned from with the COVID piece, one of the 30 lowest GDP countries in the world haven't even got plans yet. 29 of them don't even have COVID rollout plans because they can't, one, afford it, two, they don't know what the direction is, or three, how to do it. So imagine going in there with all this tech and saying, hey, we're going to run blockchain off your back end of this and this. And everybody's going to be like, what? Well, we're just trying to get our phones to work. Like, we got blackouts. And, that's what we went through 20, 30 years ago. They're going through in way higher impact today. And it changes the landscape. And as a global investment firm, and we're trying to look at these globalized initiatives, you really do need people that are on the ground there that are working within those communities to better understand what the tech is that's there and how it can be enhanced and how it can be supported, because it's going to be a costly endeavor regardless. So I think that's some great insight on how you saw it and how much it hasn't really shifted or changed a lot in that time either.
Right. And, one thing that's interesting, just as a minor aside, is so much of diplomacy and foreign aid is tied to politics. And so in the same way how, a startup can have a great contract going with a big enterprise, and there's a new CEO or a new business unit leader, and they're like, whoa, we're going to do, zero cost budget, 0-day budgeting. And then it's like, we got to start from new. And it's like, oh, geez, like that can happen with new administrations, with new ambassadors, with new heads of, agencies for international development. And so, in all because of someone high up changing, they're like, you know what, we want to cancel all these projects. And so, yeah, it's a shame that sometimes like the direct beneficiaries are at the behest of politics, even though it's thousands of miles away. But, it's all, it's part of the game that they unfortunately have no idea that they're a part of. It
makes sense. And again, money talks and drives everything, unfortunately. So there's not much you can do about that, right? How much of this experience that you've had now shifts into with the big tech, like the blockchains of the world and things like that are going on? Does that create more opportunity, or are you finding that it's just muddying the waters because the tech is so damn advanced that even North Americans haven't figured out how to use it, but people are talking about trying to implement it around the world? So has it kind of changed that whole dynamic? You're the first person I've got to interview that has a ton of stuff on blockchain. I love it, but I've struggled with how anybody's even using any of this because it's so advanced and people just can't figure out how to tie the two together. So I'm curious.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because crypto, I mean, look, obviously there are like lots of people at startups. It's like a meme now to say that you're changing the world with your like Wi-Fi connected juice machine, bring like democratizing access to nutrients and supplements or something. I mean, you'll find these crazy sort of sublines, but I mean, nothing more so than blockchain crypto for good. And I think everyone was, for the most part, fairly well-intentioned. And then I think they were also trying to sort of, at least, I've been in this space for now a couple of years. I'm not one of these OG Bitcoin millionaires or maybe now billionaires by now. But to me, it was like, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. To them, it was like blockchain or crypto can solve everything. And it was like, M-Pesa was obviously one of the most groundbreaking and really almost pioneered, especially compared to the West, of, sort of this mobile money or digital wallets. But it took a great amount of sort of like behavioral change behind the scenes, and that had to happen. That doesn't work through Google and Facebook ads like most people think. Like the cost of acquiring a customer is very different. And I'm by no means an expert on this, as opposed to, just like ramping up your Facebook ad spend using some certain keywords, then assuming you're going to drive, growth that way. It's as inorganic as it comes. So, but to go back to what you were saying in terms of like blockchain crypto, yeah, I mean, it certainly leads back to the folks like, people are basically plugging their phones in wherever they can get juice. And so to be like, hey, and, they have a lot of distrust in the system. Lots of folks, don't vote as much because there's distrust in institutions and all these other sort of like external factors. And then to sort of come in and like parachute in and say like, hey, like, this like macroeconomic problem that you may not even be aware of, like, guess what? Like they don't, and I'm not trying to generalize, but I just don't think like hyperinflationary, like the fact that Bitcoin has a fixed money supply, like really plays into the day-to-day decisions of a lot of folks in some of these target countries. And I think it's just, they missed the forest for the trees, I think, as they were trying to build these. And so, and the other thing that I'll also say, and this is a little more controversial, is, when I generally see startups, for-profit startups that are, that are kind of like bringing the violins out and all this stuff. I'm like, why aren't you a nonprofit? And look, I completely understand. And I very much, I find Peter Thiel's politics far more different. I mean, they're certainly not my cup of tea, but he has this theory that like, you really want to change the world, you start a company and a for-profit company. And I think there are a lot of elements of truth in that. But at the end of the day, it's like, if you're a for-profit company, like you're responding to your shareholders, like your customers are your customers, but don't try and like, sort of like muddle the two. And I think a lot of times I get personally annoyed because I'm like, well, I mean, be a nonprofit then. Like you really want to change the world. You really want to don't,
That's it. You want to change the world or you don't want to change the world. Figure out which one you're on, which side of the track and run it, right?
Yeah. Or just be honest that like you want to enrich, yourself, your employees and all these things for good reasons, in addition to doing this, but don't, say that this is like the sole reason for this company's, being, that kind of drives me a little bonkers.
No, I can imagine. So on the blockchain front and crypto, obviously it's all taken off. It's moving. Well, I would say the crypto side's kind of going into a bubble at the moment, but do you see the value in what it's bringing to the world? And is it really an investable area anymore? I know 4 or 5 years ago, it was the hottest thing to invest in, which was anything blockchain. I haven't really seen any like real takeoff blockchain companies. Okay, there's a couple, there's a couple of everything, but is it still an area that you focus on? Is it an area that startups should really dive into, or is it kind of a do it on the side while you're building your company?
Yeah, I still remain fairly bullish. And look, I think, just you said, we're likely in a bubble. I mean, we have unbelievable appreciation, though then again, given the bizarro world of public markets too, it's like everything's fair game at this point. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised by anything. But yeah, I mean, I think it's actually been a slow crawl. And so, during the roller coaster of the ICOs in 2017 to the all-time low, or not all-time lows, I should say, but, the lows at December of 18 and all these things. The most impressive founders, the ones that have been committed to crypto for forever, have always been heads down throughout. Like, they don't check the price. They're not day traders. They are long-term, hodlers, and they just fundamentally believe in the technology. And they're like, this is going to do it. And those companies, I think, have thrived. And those are the ones with the most recent assets that have probably been added to Coinbase's platform. They've seen unbelievable appreciation to their earlier investors. And it's been a slow, sort of rise in terms of like the amount of value, the amount of, wealth and not wealth, I guess, is purely dollars, I guess, that have gone into DeFi or decentralized finance. I think in terms of like cross-border finance and just given the various sort of like rules and regulations on a country by country basis, and given we're in this increasingly globalized world, despite the, what politics may be telling us, I think there's a ton of really interesting innovation that's about to come out, that's about to actually ship product. That's going to be really exciting. And then you have, that juxtaposed with the fact that India is trying to ban cryptocurrency. And it's just, China's about to roll out its digital yuan. They're already doing these pilots. I mean, it's almost going to be like an arms race, not too far in the future. So I still remain, very bullish. I would never discourage an entrepreneur from, trying to build something in the space. But also you have to remember that you're also competing for airplay or airtime rather with, just like there are certainly some strange, like eccentric folks in Bitcoin and crypto. And so they're going to dominate the oxygen for a little bit simply because of Bitcoin reaches, across 50K today or something. So just tread lightly. But, if you really do believe that, like a lot of us, that we're basically creating a new sort of foundational layer of the internet, then, I mean, dive head first.
So do you think with this new layer of the internet that's coming out with this, do you think it's kind of, you called it like a new arms race, but do you think it's because people want to innovate faster than anybody and any other time in the history of the world, that the rush is to innovate so fast that we're not looking at any sort of implications that are going on with the rest of the communities and the rest of the world? We need crypto and it's now. So everybody's just running and gunning as fast as they can. Cryptos are going through the roof on the cost side and on build side and everything else. But it's just almost like we haven't figured out a way to really use it yet, but let's just get this stuff out there and make sure everybody has it. and we'll figure it out after. It kind of feels like it's so rushed because if I don't get there faster, then the internet 3.0 is going to beat me to it. So like, what do I do? And is that kind of the role that's going on right now?
Yeah, I guess I should probably clarify, like with arms race, I guess I sort of meant, I think, China having already gone through this central bank digital currency exercise and rolling out digital yuan, I think that, and in what I read, is likely their quest to move the world off of the dollar as the global reserve and, make the yuan. So I think all of these countries, one, there's always going to be internal competition from country to country. And then there's also within the country, it's like, how important of a role do we want our central bank to have? And if we want it to have an important role, we've got to get a digital dollar. We have to have a digital euro and all these things, versus letting, people use cryptocurrencies and doing that stuff. Like, obviously, we still need to have some element of Big Brother. In terms of an actual arms race, I mean, I think there's a lot more pain that can be inflicted with something like AI. And I mean, if you read about what Eric Schmidt has been doing, serving on the Defense Innovation Advisory Boards and all these things, and he is like, look, like there are going to be two internets. There's going to be the Chinese internet and maybe another, and a global one, assuming we don't, assuming like not, there's no more further splintering. And then you talk about AI coming in with like, on the battlefield and stuff. And so I'm a little more scared of that world, of like answering those really important questions. And then there's also stuff that's like, I worked in insurance at an insurtech fund, and, like the biggest innovation to come into scoring someone's auto insurance, other than telematics, which actually tracks your driving, is simply like your credit score. And that was like in the 90s that they started taking that into account. And so, right now there's all sorts of really, I'm sure, underlying bias that's taking place that we're not realizing because a lot of the stuff is, caught within a black box. So I'm a lot more worried about like fundamental algorithms that are now being introduced and iterated upon that may have underlying biases that are affecting us in ways that we won't realize until, it's like years too late. And then we have to sort of go and like start building these things foundationally again. So that's more of a personal, like, given the amount of, as we've seen, sort of like entrenched, there's social justice issues, et cetera. And so like, even though we know where we're, like, I just hope we're not making the same mistakes as we of the past.
So does this create kind of an infringement on personal information data that's being collected, but on the same instance that if you take out Big Brother and you add in this layer of decentralized markets and having everybody get into them, because now you've got big time investors diving into this saying, hey, I got to be here. Elon Musk comes out and says that they put in $1 billion, which again, I don't know how they get away with telling everybody all this stuff that they're doing, which just drives everything back up in price. So does it kind of influence and change the way people are looking at things, or does it kind of stay like this for the next 3 to 4 to 5 years and no one's really too worried about their privacy issues, and decentralizing will again branch across the next two, Chinese internet and the world internet, that they're all going to just keep floating up higher until something bigger has to give? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, now, I mean, this is stuff that I hate the use of the term above my pay grade, but no, I mean, as to where I think this is all heading, you're right. It's like Tesla, he announces they put $1.5 billion into Bitcoin, and then boom, like they both pump the next day. And I mean, the whole Dogecoin thing, it's so outrageous. It's hilarious that, he and, a few others can post about it. And then boom, it's like, this thing is like, 40%, 50%. There is some market manipulation. And I understand the SEC because they're like, look, we're just here to protect the consumer. And it's just a bunch of competing priorities. It's like, well, if you're going to protect the consumer, then maybe you could also like democratize access to private securities by easing the threshold of the accredited investor, which they have done to some extent with their most recent batch of revisions. But as to where this is all heading, I mean, I think we actually, the U.S. and just maybe some of the more even some of the more developed nations have, that are currently brewing sort of war right now for free speech. And so, obviously most Americans will certainly do believe in the First Amendment, but then it's like, yeah, okay, you also can't, you can't yell out fire in a movie theater and all these things. But, as we saw with the deplatforming of, former President Trump, it's like, there were folks who were incredibly progressive and leftist supporters that still found what was going on very disconcerting. And I get it. And then also this is where it's like, well, hey, if we actually did have decentralized, ways to sort of that can't be censored or anything. I mean, this is what blockchain is all about. It's like, there you go. It's like, well, I guess that kind of solves it. But then it's like, well, what about when they're, fostering all this hate and like insurrections and all this stuff? And it's like, don't we want to have a way to turn it off? And so, yeah,
I don't know. Control features, right? Everything seems to be going to this. We all want to be the same. We all want access to be able to invest where we want. We want to do whatever we want. And then, but make sure that it's regulated on the back end. So some system's watching it, but not the cops or not this security exchange. I don't want anybody monitoring me. I want it to be self-regulated and I want to do what I want. And then when it fails, I'm going to come back and be mad at you because you shouldn't have let me do this. Why didn't you put more measurements and regulate this and control it better? You shouldn't have let me throw my money into this. So it's, it feels like this democratization and decentralization. I think they're good, but there still has to be some sort of form of management in there because it worries me that we all want to be the same without the same experience. So I demand that I want to be an investor and it shouldn't matter how I invest or when I invest. But then if I have no learning, I'm going to learn as I go. But if I fail, then I need to blame somebody instead of taking accountability for my own actions. But if I win, then I'm going to tell everybody that I was smarter than the rest. So it's that, I guess it's yin and yang, but it's an interesting world because the whole markets are driving up so high that who knows where that end goal or end point is. And then if you throw in this openness and decentralizing everybody and allowing everybody to do what they want, does it change the way startups get invested in? And does it change the way that next startup actually creates a company? Right.
I mean, my view is that I don't look at innovation. I don't think you can ever dampen innovation, no matter which way the world goes or whether that's positive or negative, whatever decisions you agree with, there are always going to be ways to improve upon. But no, I mean, you bring up a lot of good points. I mean, the thing that I think most people don't realize, well, and I'm sorry, I'm making very broad generalizations, but there is this deep, dark web. Like 99% of what's on the internet is not searchable on Google. We're all sort of living in our.
What am I missing?
Yeah. So it's like
send me some key terms.
So we're already like kind of self-censoring by just choosing to not, use a Tor, the Onion router, and go down like some ridiculous rabbit holes to search out what truly can't be censored. And so, I wonder maybe that's going to become a little more commonplace. And then, people can post whatever they want. And instead of having to go to Gab or Parler or something, they can just, you go down the deep, dark web. But yeah, I think it strikes me like the principalist, of like these American ideals and the Constitution. Like, I think it's a net positive to provide all these options, when it comes to free speech, when it comes to our rights. But, there's going to be, I feel like, a lot of malintent that goes alongside as these things grow. And so maybe that's the price of it. It's, it's kind of like if we could go back to 20 years ago and like turn off Craigslist because there would be a Craigslist killer, like, would we do so? And, all of these terrible things that happen on the internet, it's like, yeah, but it's still been an extremely net positive force for good. And so maybe, actually adding some, features of decentralization, mixed into this privacy debate and in free speech may, I think it's a net positive, but maybe it may not be as such a slam dunk case as, as other things.
Totally. I was watching a video the other day on, it was a UK video on a commercial for the smart home back in the 70s. And they're like, I should be able to walk in the room and the light will turn on because I walked in. And I'm sure they were looking at that going, wow, that is freaky. And then today people are like, why the hell is the light turning on? Like it's, we've customized ourselves based on the way marketing and the way people have pushed startups and pushed business. It's transformed every day how an experience is. It doesn't matter from walking into a store to talking on a phone to listening to the radio. It's all transformed, right? And it continues to push the line. Like when Family Guy came out, everything was moderated. You couldn't say 99% of the things that they were pushing to say. And then that all changed, right? So I think the envelope continues to push forward. I think innovation is amazing. And I think startups are really coming out of the woodwork these days with more innovation things, which I think is helping. They're not just innovating on the current stuff that keeps being innovated on. There's way more facets of verticals that they're coming into, which is making it exciting. And this kind of shifts us into where you've been and what you've been doing lately. And I heard lots of great things about the fund and Will Smith and all this cool stuff. So it would be terrible if I didn't jump in and talk about this, even though I was enjoying this deep dive worldly view of how things are really functioning and working. But maybe you can share a little bit more about the fund and what you guys are doing today.
Yeah, sure. So, so we've got these two. We've got Will and Keisuke, this Japanese LP base. We launched Fund One at the end of 2018, which is when I moved down to help launch it. We've been incredibly active. We've done 60. We just did literally yesterday our 61st deal in 2 years and a couple of months. So, investing at a breakneck pace. We had basically done 50 up until COVID, and then since then we've obviously cut 10 or 11 checks. But yeah, it's been super fun. Our investment approach is basically bifurcated into two main buckets. The first is our seed or pre-product market fit, where we tend to write checks the size of $250K, flexing up to $500K. And then a second bucket for series A's and B's, where we can do a first check of up to $2.5 million. So as you can probably tell by our investment pace, we're not leading deals out of this fund. We're just pure play co-investors. But the flip side is that we have no minimum ownership threshold. So we can afford to be as flexible as we need to in order to earn our way onto a cap table. And when it comes to the family, our two biggest value propositions, the first is very straightforward. The Smith family has north of 150 million unique followers across all the various different social media apps and platforms and whatnot. And I think that number is that was a pre-COVID number. And since then, obviously with rising screen time and all the new content, I think that number is actually pushed forward quite a bit. But I should say that that's not just Will, it's Jada, Jaden, Willow, who each appeal to very unique demographics and are icons in their own right. Jaden certainly in the climate change movement. Willow is really pushing the boundaries for an 18, 19-year-old woman. So if you're a direct to consumer startup or trying to build a brand, they're really great folks to have, quote unquote, around the cap table. There's one element, which is they obviously have, millions and millions of followers. If they post about something and that customer converts, that obviously brings the marginal cost of acquiring a customer to zero, which is, certainly helpful in a day when, folks are spending when startups are spending an insane amount on acquiring customers. The second thing that we just realized with one of our portfolio companies, is that, they even just mentioning Will Smith or, someone else as prominent as him in the press release as to banking for teen startup or whatever, it gets picked up by a lot of media channels that traditionally aren't part of the normal press circuit. And so for us in this investment called Step, we were picked up by Essence, and then that got picked up by a bunch of other sort of, media focus for African Americans, which is, much harder to reach, I guess for the Valley, traditionally hasn't been that great at it. And so, we can basically turbocharge that by simply adding Will to that press release or making an investment. And so that has turned out to be equally compelling as, whether it's a post or, whatever it may be. So yeah, we're very pleased on that front as well.
Awesome. And how did the whole connection thing get together for you guys to be able to work this forward? It's very exciting. I was talking to another investment group in the US, and they were heavily focused around Reed and from LinkedIn and his Airbnb investments and all those things. And they created a company and they've created a fund. So it was pretty exciting to learn about that and what they're doing. And they were all tied in. All these individuals are tied in through this business, that tied into this business, and they all connected. So always exciting. So how did this all come about?
Yeah. The genesis of the fund is pretty interesting. So Will and his family office, really, they've been investing in startups for, well over a decade now. Direct investing, I should say. So, he's and the family office and the folks behind him have always been very accustomed. They understand the value of getting in early. And, there are a bunch of examples, of that. And then Keisuke, Japan, I don't think has as many athletes on the global stage as, something like the US. And so he was such an accomplished, athlete in his own right that he was, and he was such a folks just turn into fanboys and fangirls when they see him. And it was basically a marriage of each family office that was saying, Will, like, I have the deal flow, especially at a moment when, there's this is an unverified statistic that 30 to 40% of venture dollars actually trickle their way back to Google and Facebook for ads. So it goes to the, it's like LP dollars to the venture fund, to the startup, to that startup's marketing department, and then into just ad spend. And so when you think about this rise of influencer marketing, it coincides perfectly. And it's like, okay, like having influencers and real talent on board can drastically help a company get off the ground. So that was one. And then Casey was like, look, I actually, have really good relationships. He's actually been an angel investor in his own right and done very well. And so marrying sort of like Will being a honeypot for deal flow with this Japanese corporate capital, and these are some of the largest and largest institutions in the world. They've been around 300 years, and they could always use fresh eyes and ears on what's going on in Silicon Valley. And so Japan is still the third largest economy by GDP. Tons of, and even sometimes a little more tech forward in certain industries like gaming and crypto. And so it was a wonderful marriage. It took a little while to get everything signed because it was such an interesting hybrid investment vehicle. But we're very happy with where we are and about to go raise fund 2 and see what the future holds.
Awesome. And is there a specific focus that you guys are on the fund, on types of investments, like the companies or the verticals, or is it pretty open-ended?
Very open. Yeah, we're by design generalist, and really we're as opportunistic as it comes. So it's not that we're, a lot of funds, and certainly my former fund, will have like sort of thematic investing buckets, or they'll just have a thesis on the way they think the world's going to go and look for companies that fit it. We would much prefer to follow a lot of the smarter funds out there into what they're investing in. And so, and that's backed up by data. It's not just sort of, following around. It's like with Theranos, like, yeah, that's how things got out of hand when everyone's just following, quote unquote, smart money. Though one, I should add that there were actually no like top tier Silicon Valley funds. I mean, lots of Valley folks have actually, if you ask around, like they passed on it because they were like, yeah, I went to Walgreens and they weren't, like they were just lying their presentation or something. They weren't actually, using the finger prick. Anyway, I totally digress. To us, 90% of returns in venture accrue to the top 10% of the funds. And so what does that mean? It's like, okay, well, if I want to do like it's probably best to be an LP because I want 80% of the profit, not 20% if I'm a GP. But if I am going to, play in the direct investing game, then I'd like to have a seat at the table. I want to be in those rounds. Now, obviously, I'm never going to be able to win a lead over an Andreessen. Well, get my term sheet, win out Sequoia, et cetera, Greylock, as you were just saying with Reed. But if we can, prove our value enough to co-invest alongside them, then we can still have a profitable, business model as a fund, basically rivaling a fund of funds to some extent, because they have to still give up fees on fees. So that's basically how we've been sort of operating. It's like, let's talk to let's befriend, no sharp elbows, play nicely with everyone. We're not trying to muscle anybody out of a round. We're just trying to prove our value and, keep us in the game and take it from there.
Right. That makes a big
and difference. Be invited. 100%. And look, there are a lot of other funds. It's competitive. Will's not the only celebrity that's gotten in the venture game. But we think we've got something a little more differentiated with our Japanese angle. But the second part of our value prop, I should say, is just business development for the country as a whole. So given they're still the third largest economy by GDP, and they're very hungry for innovation, we have a number of examples to point to on both those fronts.
Brilliant. I worked with a startup maybe 8 years ago, and it was in Will's early investment period. And I guess he was in Toronto. He was working with a marketing agency, and they managed all of Will's social footprint at the time.
Nice.
So they were, I can't remember, we were working on building a platform for them. So I didn't have a direct conversation with Will, but I was part of that whole kind of atmosphere. And it was kind of neat to know that he was so heavily, like an Ashton Kutcher, was so heavily involved in the startup community as I was working inside of it as well, but not to the extent that they were. So it was pretty fascinating to kind of see that, how much it's progressed over the last 10 years.
Right. Yeah, no, it's exciting. Hopefully a lot more to come in the next 10.
Agreed. All right. So one of the things that we're we're going to jump into right now is rapid fire questions.
Love it.
And because I closed the template down, I'm going to go off by heart here. So first question to jump in and dive into this is what got you started in working with early stage companies?
I think it was probably, and then I got to make these rapid. It was just the biggest and most influential companies and people were all venture backed and have all sort of followed this, tried and true path. And so to even be, look, like the most trite thing to say as an investor is like, thanks for having me along for the ride. And like, it's been so great, but like, I understand every time I see those on LinkedIn or wherever, as somebody rings the bell at the, at the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. And I get it. And even, and look, that's obviously in the public, like IPO is an unbelievable outcome, but even for the smaller wins when they get acquired and, just seeing these founders go from every startup is a roller coaster. I don't care, even if you're Clubhouse now or whatever, but seeing them go through these trials and tribulations and just like come out for the better. And meanwhile, I'm like sitting, I'm like, on the couch, like taking their call as to why their VP of engineering quit and they're crying and whatever. But like, there's nothing more fulfilling, I think, other than actually being a founder, which, may or may not present itself someday.
Awesome. What's your favorite part of investing?
It's probably, my favorite part of investing is probably when the momentum shifts. Because when folks go out for their, for their first round, when they're doing their process, it's a ton of no's. It's a ton of like, oh my God, like, are we doing something wrong? Like, what am I doing? Like, I mean, am I going to lose my family and like all these things? There's so much second guessing. And then the second they get a term sheet or the second they get that yes, and then all the others that were sitting on the sidelines start like piling in and they're like stalking the founder or something. It's like when that light switch flips, that's like the most exciting. And you just get a text that's like such and such, like we just got a term sheet and it's like, boom. Like obviously again, you are by no means out of the woods. It's just, it's another milestone, but that to me is so satisfying.
Yeah. Well, I love that part. How many companies do you invest in per year?
We're probably going to do, I'd say about 20 to 25.
Okay. Awesome. You mentioned the vertical side. So on the due diligence, is there anything that you look for when you're diving into a company?
Mostly it's finding out what perspective, the thesis of the lead partner. So whoever has like, look, at the end of the day, you literally have to put your money where your mouth is in venture investing, and the leads are the ones that are putting the most money at stake. And, in theory, they have the most conviction or, similar amount. And so understanding why they do have that and where they think the world is going by backing that startup is the most important piece of any investment.
Okay. What's your timeline for an investment? Like beginning from a first phone call to the close, how long does it usually take?
We have never exceeded 2 weeks.
That's fast.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing I should add is that it's like we're basically forced to, like, it's a function of our investing. So most of the times we'll get calls. We have 100% inbound deal flow. They're like,
you guys are doing sidecars. So sidecars tend to be all the work's there. People already investments are ready to go, and you guys are coming in and making that investment. So
basically, yeah, there's a second closing 2 weeks after the first. We get introed, right around the first closing, and then it's like, okay, we have to run our process, otherwise, they're going to leave us behind.
I love it. Are there any things that you like to really emphasize on in your research? Is it on the team? Is it on the product, the CEO? Like, is there anything that you really just drive into?
There are a number. Like at the early stage, it's team, product, and market, or team, TAM, and moat. But honestly, so much. We're living in like just bizarro world right now with just being in this pandemic. Valuations have never been higher. I think actually through this year, like we've doubled the amount of venture capital to date compared to last year, which again is only like 5 or 6 weeks and is probably overrepresented by some super concentrated investments. But the way things are going, it's really exciting. The one thing I will say one thing that I think separates the good from the great, or the one common trait that every successful startup that I've seen has, is capital efficiency. There are a bunch of ways to measure that, whether you can do it by valuation or by dollars raised, equating to revenue or whatever metric you want to choose. But ultimately, like that input to output in terms of capital efficiency is such a defining characteristic when a startup reaches that point.
Agreed. Do you have any preferred terms that you invest on? Pref shares, common shares, safes?
No. I mean, we're totally indifferent as to whether it's a price round, convertible note, or safe. As for, I mean, preferences and non-participants, I mean, yeah, we are as typical as it gets. So one, we don't we don't give term sheets. So we're always following what the original investor is. That said, we have never in the 61, I mean, have done anything with anything participating. That's either a bad company or a bad investor for the most part. I mean, yeah. And again, all this stuff is very geographically specific and situation specific, but it's hard to find, there's hair on every deal, but when you see something participating, it's hairier than it should be.
Fair enough. Do you do follow-on investments?
We do try and double down on our winners as much as we can.
Awesome. Do you take board seats?
No board seats. We've got a couple observer seats, but, early stage companies, you're not putting on a suit. You're, opening up, doing a 2-hour Zoom or something. And honestly, with early stage companies, you're always you're on an informal board, depending on how close you are with the founder. So that's kind of where we sit.
Okay. 2 more questions on this side. So because you guys are the way your fund structured and it works, do you guys do anything outside of it? You mentioned in Japan where you've got opened up markets. Are there other things that you do outside of just financing? Like, are you doing marketing campaigns for them? Are you doing ways to really get that product out there and help bolster up your companies?
Yeah. So certainly there's the will side and the family as to like the power they bring. If they do choose to do, to post about something, they also have, what I would describe as a media empire behind them. So, he's got a huge content and social media team. They have like a TV and movie studio. I mean, a whole just big operation that's going on. And so to the extent that any startups need any guidance as to like, what does this make sense? Does this kind of campaign make sense to activate, this such and such, or should we be targeting this cohort? Is we have a number of folks that they can talk to that are doing some of the biggest and best deals. Certainly every movie he does, Ryan Reynolds' latest show, things on Snap, and all the new sort of mediums that are out there. So that, and then certainly the Japan side too is, it tends to favor later stage companies. But if you're looking at targeting an international global growth market with enterprise ACVs that can match US, Japan is a very great place to go.
Awesome. I'm a big fan. I love Japan. Yeah. I've been there a couple of times, especially in Kyoto. It's amazing. Mountains awesome too. So we kind of like to shift things into, before I get to a little bit more personal side, the one question I have is I'm always looking for those real heartfelt, heartstring pulling type of startups that you've come across where, they're on the brink of destruction or they're on the brink of breaking through on success, and then something occurs and they've had to struggle their way through. But just to show people what it really takes, it doesn't matter what corner of the world you're in, what it takes to be an entrepreneur. Something that comes to mind that just kind of like, yeah, this lady did this and it was amazing, or whatever it might be. Just anything that comes.
Man, there are so many to choose from. I mean, it's actually hard to really give one. I'm trying to think. I mean, I've done like same day. There have been financings for companies that weren't about to get done where I had to wake up at like 4 a.m. I was in Madison, Wisconsin, drive to O'Hare through a snowstorm. Not even sure if my plane, fly out to LA to do a full day, basically help one of our portfolio companies pitch to get a term sheet. Otherwise they were going to have to like turn off the lights. Basically they had to start doing the wind down that night because their lawyers were like, we cannot in good conscience or in good faith, like do our duty if we don't tell you, like you need to start shutting things down. That same day, and now I'm tugging the strings because we were putting our dog down that day. It was like miserable. And I'm certainly not trying to get, any sort of sympathy towards my side, but especially for the founder, it was just like such a harrowing time. Anyway, we did it and we wouldn't find out until the following or like later that night or something when I was on the plane back. But I like sprinted back to LAX to go back to this still snowstorm in Chicago. And then, my drive back, I was like thinking about my dog. They did end up getting it. That company is now, I should say, faltering and like they're looking for a soft landing. But I mean, to be honest, it's like, look, anyone can. I mean, the things that actually really, I'll say that things that I've been humbled by are, especially in the Valley, there's such a over selection, over optimization for pedigree. I mean, if you have a Stanford, like it's just assumed that if you went to Stanford, you can probably go raise a $1 or $2 million seed for whatever you do or something. And the thing that I really love to see are those folks, and it's certainly represented in, lots of up and comers, but even folks that went to, quote unquote, non-target schools or did things non-traditionally prior to, doing venture or doing a startup, because it reminds me of that book Range. But I think they've had to work, and it's just something that's very true and bandied about with African Americans. It's like, you got to work twice as hard to get half as far. And I think that's true even for folks that didn't, grew up, not with as much means as a lot of others, or, going to these non-target schools and just having to sort of like work their way up. It's like, you went to like some state school and wherever, like, what are you doing at this like glorious tech company surrounded by Ivy Leaguers and everyone's fairly well off. And so, yeah, to me, like that's still, and look, the Valley and the whole tech industry has a long, long way to go, but there's nothing personally for me that's more reassuring than seeing someone like pull themselves up by the bootstraps, teaching them to code while they're like working, 2 jobs. I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable what people put themselves through just to get to a place where most others just kind of walk into. And so, yeah, I mean, that to me is the most reassuring. And really, it's just for any aspiring founders and VCs out there. It's like, look, you don't need to go to a fancy school. You really don't need. You just need sort of like a really unique way, perspective on the way you think the world is going, and a product to fit that world. So yeah, that to me, that's what keeps me going. And that's what's the most exciting, even in, crazy times like during an insurrection, and just we're at the most polarized, I think, since I've ever been alive. But there's way more hope and optimism than there is, being cynical and pessimist. So that's what keeps me going.
Well said. Well said. All right, we're going to jump into like 3-4 questions. One question I should ask at the beginning, but we're going to jump into these more personal side of things. Sure. So first question is, what's one thing about you that nobody would know?
Ooh, so like what's not, okay. Yeah, I've got one. 10 years ago, I was living, or 11 years ago, summer of 2010, I was living in Uganda, and the World Cup was happening, the final. And we had a reservation at the Shadondo Rugby Club with a couple of our friends. We're going to go watch, I think it was like Netherlands, Italy, I want to say. Anyway, at halftime, we heard what sounded like the largest firework I've ever heard. And we didn't think anything of it. We're like, oh, it's the World Cup. Like nothing happened. Oh, sorry. I'm screwing the story up. We had a reservation at the rugby club. They lost our reservation. And so we went to a restaurant across the street. And at halftime, we heard this like big firework or whatever. Didn't think anything of it. Right as we got to the 90th minute, we heard what we were sure was a bombing, and the whole restaurant just like erupted. And then there was like a little aftershock, which is when we definitely knew. And so we got out of there, and the bombing actually happened at the rugby club where we were supposed to have dinner. 65, I think 65 people died. That firework that we thought happened in halftime across the city was also a separate place that had been bombed. So I'm not saying like, it's like, I was like one of those people that missed a plane that ended up crashing. Like it was across this rugby pitch. But certainly dodged some in, crazy, violence. That's for sure.
That's crazy. Okay. Well, that's one thing that people wouldn't know then, I guess. That's, you're hitting it well on that one. That was, a tough story, but sounds like, you made it out. That's all matters.
Made it through.
All right.
Yeah.
Second question. Favorite sports team?
Favorite sports team? Oh, probably the Green Bay Packers. Grew up in Wisconsin. I'm a shareholder, so I get to call myself a team owner. Thanks. I spent $350 8 years ago and they opened it up. But yeah, no, I love what they're about. It's got that small town feel. You got the Ice Bowl way back when, and it's just, they're such a lovable team. And now that the Cubs won and that curse is broken, I think the Packers, should hopefully, hold that. All Americans should hold them in the highest regard.
I agree. Yeah, that's good. They're an all right team. All right. Now this is the big one. Favorite movie and the character that you'd play in the movie.
Oh man. Wait, okay. So now I got to choose which character I want to play in. What is my favorite movie? Well, okay. So there's like a real answer, which I'll give as Apollo 13, because I would love to be Jim Lovell, AKA Tom Hanks. I think that's just, unbelievable what they went through. But my fun answer is Beverly Hills Cop 3, and I would love to be Eddie Murphy as Axel Foley in that movie.
That's awesome. Yeah, he was phenomenal. I'm writing this down because I know I have to go watch this movie. So
yeah, I mean, it's just so fun. It's such a ridiculous movie, but love Eddie Murphy, obviously. So
yeah. Oh, and I thought you were going to go into like a Will Smith movie or something. And I actually just watched what's that one where I Am Will or I Am Sam or whatever it is?
I Am Robot.
Yeah,
I Robot.
Yeah, is that the no? I saw that one before. It was the one where he's the only one left on Earth that he thinks, and he's trying to find the cure. Contagion.
Oh, no, that one. Yeah. I know what you're thinking of. Wow. Should have looked over his filmography before this. What is it? It's not iRobot. It's damn it.
I thought it was I Am something, but I watched it literally like 3 weeks ago. I probably should have watched it at the start of the pandemic, but I had seen it already and I thought, I don't want to watch this. But I watched it the other day. Still a great movie. I just anything that can get you kind of entrenched in what's going on in the world, and it did a good job. So
yeah, I Am Legend. Independence Day, by the way, is a great. If I had to choose a Will movie, 100% Independence Day. But yeah, I Am Legend.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, or Mib's good too. He's done some good flicks. Man, we could do a whole interview just on Will Smith and his movies. But yeah, he's done a lot of great things. So, for sure. Well, mostly the best thing he's done that's a great thing is he created a fund. So that's all that matters. So all the other stuff is okay, but the fun thing, that's what keeps the world running and moving forward. So I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's a beast.
Well, Vik, I appreciate all your time today. Phenomenal. We went through an amazing journey. I got to finally pick some brain on blockchain and find out where the world's going. And I think at the end, you know what? You provided a ton of insight. It was awesome. Big fan of your movie selection. I'm going to go watch that one. But the way we like to end our shows is we want to provide you with the last word. So the last thing that you're going to get to say to a startup or to investor, whatever thing that you want to share that'll help them through tomorrow or through the next day, I turn it over to you to give the last word.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And first, and again, thank you for having me. This has been by far the most fun podcast I've had. And I actually always appreciate when folks, either make it a conversation or just go off the beaten path and tell me about your, most favorite deal. And it's so very much appreciate that. And as far as, I get any advice to start, one is actually trust your gut a lot more than VCs like me. We will never understand. And this is such a shame of the power of capital formation and allocation in this world. But, a lot of folks just don't get bogged down. Don't, you might have a friend that's a founder that was able to raise money a lot easier than you might be able to. But yeah, I guess, the one thing that I really like to say is run your own race. There's always going to be someone younger and smarter and with more experience. And, there's always going to be another competitor coming out of the woodwork. And it's just focus on doing what you told your investors and on what you want to do and on what you want to build. The rest is just riffraff and is just noise. And as long as you execute on things that you promised yourself and you promised your team, then, you laid it all out there. And I'm not going to rehash the Teddy Roosevelt in the arena thing, but all those things are generally true, but sincerely, yeah, no, I wish everyone the best of luck. And then my email is, I'm sure you're gonna put this in the show notes, but it's Vik, VIK@dreamers.vc. I respond to every single email. I try to, I hate the fact that, so the importance of a warm intro is so necessary. Other folks will just send it to the trash can if it's cold or something. I think it's a terrible way to live. And it's really unfair. And so I'm not saying that, you're getting the terms, you're getting money or a check or something, but the least we can do is be decent and courteous, in this world. So, please do reach out and thanks again for having me.
That was awesome. Yeah, a lot of fun. Like he said, provided so much cool stuff there with Vik. I loved it, man. Trust your gut and run your own race. Man, that's impactful because that's what startup world is all about. it's figuring out where you want to be, man. Create your own world and then live in it. Take the insights, take the info, and drive it. But yeah, they've got a really cool fund. They're doing a lot of great things. They're following on, and they're helping make lots of investments. And big fan of the whole Will Smith space and what they've done too. So thank you again, Vik, and everybody for joining in.